My name is Adrienne, and I was 33 years old the afternoon a man I had met exactly 4 times looked me in the eye in my mother's kitchen and said, "Teresa doesn't need your oversight anymore." He said it pleasantly. That's the part one keep coming back to. Not aggressively, not with any particular edge, just pleasantly, the way you'd tell someone the parking situation had changed, and they no longer needed to feed the meter. I nodded. I said I understood. I drove to the bank. What he didn't know, and what my mother didn't know, and what nobody in that house knew, is that I had been building a paper record for 2.5 years. Not because I suspected anything specific, but because I am the kind of person who keeps records the way other people keep keys. Habitually. Without drama. Just in case. The bank manager printed the account history without me asking her to. 61 pages. And when I brought that document to my mother's kitchen table 3 weeks later, with my Aunt Cora sitting across from us and my mother's financial advisor on the phone, the afternoon went somewhere none of us had entirely planned for. Welcome back to channel, where quiet people keep better records than anyone expects. Subscribe and drop a comment. I read everyone. I want to start with the thing that is hardest to explain because I think if you don't understand it first, the rest of the story won't make the kind of sense it should. The thing is this. I trusted my mother completely, and I trusted her not because I was naive or because I hadn't been paying attention, but because I had 33 years of evidence that she was the kind of person who deserved to be trusted. She was organized. She was careful. She had raised me alone after my father left when I was 9, and she had done it without complaint and without drama, and the household she ran was a household where things were accounted for and nothing was wasted. She kept receipts in a folder in the kitchen drawer. She balanced her checkbook by hand until her mid-60s. She was, in the most fundamental way, reliable. That is the context inside which I set up the monthly transfer. Not blindness. Not carelessness. Evidence-based trust in a person whose track record had been, for 3 decades, spotless. I want you to hold on to that because the story I'm about to tell you is partly about what happened to the money and partly about what happens when the person you have built your trust on changes. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but gradually, in the way that people change when a new relationship reorganizes what they prioritize and what they're willing to overlook. Who I am and what I do. My name is Adrienne. I am 37 now. When this story begins, I was 33, living in a city called Portsmouth, working as a licensed insurance underwriter at a regional firm that handled commercial property policies. I had been in underwriting for 8 years at that point. The work requires a particular way of thinking. You are always assessing risk, always asking what could go wrong, always reading the fine print of a situation before you agree to stand behind it. You develop a habit of scrutiny that becomes, after enough years, simply the way you process information. My mother Teresa lived in Caulfield, about 90 minutes from Portsmouth, in the house where I had grown up. A 3-bedroom ranch on a quiet street in an older neighborhood, the kind of house that had been paid off for a decade and a half, and that my mother had maintained with the same methodical care she applied to everything. New roof in 2019. Furnace replaced the year after. The gutters cleaned every fall without fail. She was 64 when this story begins and had been retired for 3 years, living on a pension from the school district where she had worked as an administrator for 27 years and a modest investment account she had built carefully over time. She did not struggle financially.
I want to be clear about that.
My mother was not a woman in financial distress who needed a rescue. She was comfortable, managed her money well, and had never once asked me for help before the arrangement began. I have one sibling, a younger brother named Darnell, who lives in the Pacific Northwest and who I will come back to. My father's side of the family is not part of this story. The relevant extended family, for our purposes, is my mother's older sister Cora, who has lived 40 minutes from Caulfield for her entire adult life, who has been my mother's closest friend since before I was born, and who had a relationship with my mother so long and so layered that she could tell, at 50 feet, when something was off. Cora noticed before I did. That matters, and I'll explain how. How the arrangement started. My mother met a man named Warren at a community center event in the fall of the year she turned 63. She mentioned him in passing on a phone call. I've been going to a watercolor class on Thursday afternoons, and there's a man there who's quite good, actually. And I filed it the way you file these things when your parent mentions something low stakes. I was glad she was getting out. She had been retired for 2 years, and I had worried, quietly, about isolation. Over the next several months, Warren appeared in the phone calls with increasing frequency. He had retired early from some kind of logistics work. He was 61. He had been married before briefly, and the divorce had been years ago. He liked to cook. He was, according to my mother, very attentive. She said this word several times across several calls with a warmth that I recognized as genuine, and I was glad for her. She had been alone for a long time. She deserved company. She deserved someone who was attentive. By the following spring, Warren was spending most weekends at her house. By summer, he had a drawer there and a key. By fall, my mother called me to say she had something to discuss, and could I come to Caulfield for a weekend? I drove down on a Friday afternoon. Warren was there for dinner, the first time I had met him in person. He was physically imposing in the mild way of tall men who have kept themselves reasonably fit, with an easy confidence in his own space that I noticed, but did not analyze too carefully. He cooked dinner, which was good. He was sociable, asked about my work, told a story about a trip he and my mother had taken to a botanical garden the previous month. He was pleasant. That is the most accurate word I have for him in that first meeting. Pleasant. After dinner, when Warren had stepped out to his car for something, my mother told me what she wanted to discuss. She said her household costs had shifted a bit since Warren had been spending more time there, and she was thinking about reorganizing how she managed the monthly bills. She said she had opened a separate household account that she and Warren were both contributing to for groceries, utilities, shared expenses. She said it would help her feel like the relationship was balanced, like they were both putting something in. She said, "I was wondering if you'd be willing to contribute something monthly, just for the household. You've always said you wanted to help more, and this would be a practical way." I said, "Of course. What are you thinking?" She said, "3,000 would make a real difference." I said yes. I set up the transfer the following Monday, $3,000 a month, into the new household account she had described. I did not ask whose name the account was in. I did not ask for statements. I had just spent an evening with the man she was building this new chapter of her life with, and he had cooked dinner and asked about my work and seemed like someone who was treating her well. I set up the transfer and went home. The years the transfer ran. The first year was unremarkable in the way that arrangements are unremarkable when they are working or when they appear to be working. My mother seemed happy. Warren was present in her life in a way she described consistently as positive. When I visited, which I did every 6 to 8 weeks, the house was maintained. The refrigerator was full. My mother looked well. I had no specific reason for concern. What I did notice, gradually, and without being able to name it precisely at first, was a change in the texture of my conversations with her. Not dramatic, nothing you could point to in a single call and say, "There, that's it." More like a cumulative shift. The calls became slightly shorter. The details she volunteered became slightly less specific. When I asked direct questions, "How are the finances feeling? Is the household account covering what you need?" she would give me an answer that was reassuring but had a practice quality, like a response that had been smoothed down by repetition. Once, in the second year, I asked if I could see a statement from the household account. Not with any alarm behind the question, just because I am who I am professionally, and the habit of documentation is as natural to me as breathing. My mother said she'd have to find the login, and then she moved the conversation somewhere else, and I let it go because she had moved it, and I did not want to press. I let it go more than once.
I want to be honest about that.
There were other signals I processed and filed without fully examining. Warren's car, which had been a several years old sedan when I first met him, was replaced in the second year of the arrangement with something newer and considerably more expensive. He mentioned, casually over dinner, that he'd gotten a good trade-in deal. My mother made a comment once about a short trip they had taken to a resort town 3 hours away. "A nice place," she said, "a little splurge." I was glad she was enjoying herself. I did not ask who had paid for it. I want to be careful not to make myself sound foolish, because I don't think I was foolish. I think I was operating from a base assumption that had not yet given me enough concrete evidence to override itself. My mother was a careful person. She had always been a careful person. The idea that the household account might be functioning differently than I believed required me to distrust my 33 years of evidence, and I was not yet ready to do that. My Aunt Cora was further along in that process than I was. What Cora saw, and when she said it, Cora had known Warren for as long as I had, nearly, but she had seen him in contexts I hadn't. Weekday afternoons, ordinary visits, the low-key texture of my mother's daily life rather than the prepared-for-dinner table. She had formed opinions she kept largely to herself for the first 2 years, because my mother was happy and because Cora has never been the kind of person who inserts herself into someone else's relationship without a specific reason. The specific reason arrived in the form of a conversation she had with my mother in the early part of the 3rd year. She told me about it later, after everything happened. So, I'm reconstructing it from her account. She had been at my mother's house for an afternoon visit, just the two of them. Warren was out. They had been talking about ordinary things, and then Cora asked about the investment account. My mother had mentioned it casually months before, and Cora, who tracks things the way people track things when they are paying quiet attention, had been waiting for an update. My mother said the investment account had been restructured. She said it in the calm, matter-of-fact way she said things when she had pre-decided not to discuss them further. Cora asked what restructured meant. My mother said Warren had helped her move some of the funds into a different vehicle, that the previous structure hadn't been optimized, that Warren understood these things from his logistics background. Cora said she didn't know logistics involved investment management. My mother said Warren was broadly financially knowledgeable. Cora did not press further that afternoon, but she called me that evening and said in the careful way she says important things, "Adrienne, I think you should know what your mother told me today. And I think you should ask some questions." I listened to what Cora told me, and then I sat with it for about a week, during which I did 2 things. First, I looked up the investment account. I had the institution name from a document my mother had shared years ago, and confirmed that the account balance had decreased significantly from the last figure I had known. Second, I started printing my own bank records. Every transfer I had made to the household account, going back to the beginning. I organized them by date and amount, and kept them in a folder in my filing cabinet. I was not ready to act yet, but I was done letting things go. The visit and what Warren said. It was a Saturday afternoon in March of the 4th year when I drove to Caulfield for what I had told my mother was a routine visit. I had called ahead. She sounded pleased. When I arrived, Warren's car was in the driveway.
I had known it might be.
I had driven 90 minutes thinking through how the afternoon might go, and I had settled into a particular kind of steadiness, the professional kind, the one I use when I am reviewing a policy with significant exposure, and I need to stay precise and unrushed no matter what I find. My mother met me at the door. She was warm, a little more careful in her warmth than usual, which I noticed. Warren was in the kitchen. He came out to say hello, and his hello had a particular quality I had not experienced in our previous meetings, a slight increase in the pleasantness, the compensatory warmth of someone who has been told something and is managing around it. We sat in the living room. My mother brought coffee. We talked for a while, her garden, my work, a neighbor who had moved away. Warren participated easily. He was good at conversation in the way of people who have spent a long time making conversation in situations that required it. It was about 40 minutes in when I had steered things toward the household account with a question I had rehearsed, asking my mother if she was happy with how the account was functioning, whether it was covering everything it needed to, that Warren said it. He said, "Actually, Adrienne, we've been thinking that Teresa's household finances are in a good place now. She's got a good system. I think you can probably relax a bit on that front. Teresa doesn't need your oversight anymore." He said it pleasantly. I cannot stress this enough. The tone was the tone of someone doing you a favor, relieving you of a burden, releasing you from a responsibility you no longer needed to carry. My mother looked at the coffee table. Not at me. At the coffee table. I said, "I appreciate that. I'll think about it." I finished my coffee. I stayed another 30 minutes, kept the conversation ordinary, said goodbye to both of them, hugged my mother in the doorway. She held on for a second longer than usual. I drove to the end of the street, turned right, and then pulled into a gas station parking lot and sat there for 4 minutes. Then I drove to the Portsmouth branch of the bank where the household account was held. It was a branch I used myself, same institution, different accounts. I knew the branch manager. a woman named Claudette, professionally. I had sent clients her way twice over the years. I walked in and asked if I could speak with her. The branch, and what Claudette showed me. Claudette brought me into her office and closed the door. I explained that I had been making monthly transfers into an account for 4 years and that I was trying to understand the account structure, specifically whose name the account was in and what the full transaction history looked like. I told her I could provide documentation of every transfer I had made. She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "Give me a few minutes." She pulled up the account on her screen. She looked at it for longer than I expected. Then, without saying anything specific, she printed the account history. All of it. 61 pages. She clipped them together and slid them across the desk. She said, "I think you'll want to look at that carefully." I looked at it there in her office. Not the whole 61 pages, just enough. Enough to see the pattern. The account was in Warren's name only. My mother's name was not on it. Every transfer I had made for 4 years had gone directly into an account that my mother could not access and had never controlled. The outgoing transfers from that account went, with a regularity that made the pattern immediately visible, to a second account at a different institution, also in Warren's name. The total of my incoming transfers across 48 months, $144,000. The total of what had flowed out to that second account, $131,000. I sat with that for a moment. My hands had gone very still on the paper. Not cold. Still. Like they were waiting for instructions. Claudette said, "Do you need anything else from me today?" I said, "May I keep this?" She said, "That's your copy." I thanked her. I drove home. I called Cora from the road and told her what I had found.
She was quiet for a long time.
Then she said, "When do you want to go to your mother?" I said, "Not until I've had a conversation with someone who knows what this means legally." She said, "Smart." The meeting I arranged. I spent the following week doing 2 things. I met with a financial advisor named Mr. Osei, who had been managing a small account of mine for 3 years and who I trusted to be both knowledgeable and discreet. I brought the printed account history, my own transfer records, and a legal pad. We sat in his office for 90 minutes. He reviewed what I had brought. He told me, in careful and precise language, what the account structure meant and what my options were. He said that because the transfers had been voluntary and there was no POA or formal custodial arrangement in writing, the legal situation was complex, but that the documentation I had was significant and that my mother, as the intended beneficiary of the funds, had standing to make certain inquiries and requests. He said he was willing to be available by phone if I needed him during a family conversation. I said I would call him when I knew the timing. Then I called Cora, and we set the date. The afternoon at the kitchen table. 3 weeks after my visit to the branch, I drove to Caulfield again. This time Cora drove separately and met me in the driveway. I had called my mother the day before and told her I needed to come and talk about something, that it was important that I needed her to be home and that I would explain when I got there. I told her I would prefer Warren not be present. My mother was quiet on the phone when I said that. Then she said, "All right." She met us at the door. Just her. The house was quiet. She had made tea, which meant she had been managing her anxiety the way she always manages it, through preparation, through small acts of domestic care that give the hands something to do. We sat at the kitchen table. I set the folder on the table without opening it. I asked my mother if she could tell me whose name was on the household account, the one I had been sending money to for 4 years. She said, "It's a joint account. Both of us." I said, "Mom, the account is in Warren's name only. Your name is not on it." I checked with the bank. Something happened to her face. Not collapse. My mother does not collapse. But a shift. The particular shift of someone who has been told something that reorganizes a structure they had believed was solid. Her hands, which had been flat on the table, moved to her mug. I opened the folder. I placed the account history in front of her. I said, "This is the full transaction record. Every transfer I sent went here. And this is where it went from there." I turned to the page where the outgoing transfers were summarized. $131,000 over 4 years, moved to a second account in Warren's name at a different bank. Cora, across the table, was watching my mother. My mother looked at the paper. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked up, not at me, not at Cora, at the window above the kitchen sink. At nothing in particular.
Her jaw was set. Her eyes were dry.
She was doing what she had always done in hard moments, which was hold the structure of herself together by force of will. I said, I also want to tell you that Mr. Osei is available by phone if you have questions about what your options are. He's reviewed the documents. My mother said, How long have you known? I said, 3 weeks. I wanted to have everything in order before I came. She looked at the paper again. Then she said very quietly, He told me you were being controlling, that your oversight wasn't good for our relationship. Cora's hand moved to the table, close to my mother's but not touching. Just present. I said, I know. My mother picked up the account history. She turned the pages slowly, not reading every line, just moving through them, feeling the weight of the document in her hands. Then she set it down and looked at me and said, Call Mr. Osei. What the phone call established. Mr. Osei had been waiting. I put him on speaker. He introduced himself to my mother and to Cora, briefly and professionally. He had reviewed the documentation and he walked my mother through what it showed and what it meant in plain language. The account structure, the transfer pattern, the distinction between what I had intended the money for and what had actually happened to it. He told her she had standing to request a full accounting and to pursue several civil remedies. He told her that the path forward depended on what she wanted and that there was no obligation to act in any particular way, but that the documentation was solid and the options were real. My mother asked one question. She said, Can I close his access to any of my accounts immediately? Mr. Osei said she could. He walked her through the steps. She wrote them down on the notepad she had brought to the table the way she had always written things down, neatly, in her particular compact handwriting, without rushing. When the call ended, the kitchen was very quiet. The afternoon light had shifted to the low amber of late afternoon, coming through the window at an angle that caught the side of Cora's face and the edge of the account history folder on the table. My mother sat for a moment. Then she said, I'm going to need to make some calls. I said, I know. We can stay as long as you need. She said, He was here this morning. He said you were coming and that I should tell you the arrangement was fine. Her jaw moved. I didn't tell him what you said on the phone. I said nothing. She said, That was smart of me, wasn't it? I said, Yes, that was smart. What came after? Warren did not appear at the house that day. He called my mother's cell phone twice during the afternoon, and she did not answer. That evening, after Cora and I had stayed for dinner, my mother cooked, because cooking is how she regains the feeling of control over her own space. She sent him a text message. I did not see the message.
I don't know exactly what it said.
I know that he called twice more that night, and that she did not answer those calls either. He came to the house the following morning. My mother spoke with him at the door. I was not there for that conversation. She told me about it later, in the particular compressed and precise way she reports things when she has already processed the feeling and is presenting me with the facts. She said he had a lot of explanations. He said the account structure had been for tax reasons. He said the outgoing transfers were investments on her behalf that he was managing. He said I had misread the documents and that Mr. Osei had given her bad information. He said she was making a decision she would regret because her daughter had frightened her. My mother said she had listened to all of it. And then she said, Warren, I've been balancing a checkbook by hand since 1987. I can read a bank statement. She closed the door. She told me that when she said it, she was looking at the middle of the door, not at his face, and that she heard his car start and leave about 3 minutes later. The conversations that followed. Darnell, my brother, called me from the Pacific Northwest 2 days after everything happened. My mother had called him first, which was right. He deserved to hear it from her. He was shaken in the way that people who have been far from a situation are shaken when they understand what they missed while they were away. He said he should have been more present. I told him we all should have been more present, and that what mattered now was what happened going forward. He flew out the following month.
He stayed for a week.
He helped my mother with the practical restructuring, closing the account, following Mr. Osei's recommended steps, having a conversation with the institution about the transfer history. None of the money was directly recoverable through simple means. The civil path existed but was long and uncertain, and my mother, after consideration, decided she did not want to pursue it. She said she wanted the situation gone, not extended. I understood that. I did not try to change her mind. What she did pursue was a full accounting with Mr. Osei of her actual financial picture, the investment account that Warren had restructured, the household account, her pension, and property. It took 2 meetings and some correspondence. The investment account had been moved in ways that were legal but disadvantageous. She began the process of returning it to a structure she controlled and understood. Cora came to Caulfield twice in the month after. She did not make a production of it. She just showed up, stayed for dinner, watched television with my mother on Friday nights the way they had watched television together since before I was born. I drove down most weekends for 2 months. Not every weekend. My mother did not want or need constant monitoring, and I knew that treating her like someone who needed constant monitoring would be its own kind of disrespect. But I was there. I cooked sometimes. We worked in the garden. We talked about things that had nothing to do with any of it. In the spring, she planted tomatoes. She has always planted tomatoes. She showed me the new variety she was trying, something that was supposed to be disease-resistant and productive through September. She was methodical about it, the way she is methodical about everything, pressing each seedling into the soil with careful hands and measuring the spacing with a ruler she had brought from the kitchen. I watched her do this and thought about the folder on the kitchen table and the way she had sat with it and the way she had said, "I can read a bank statement," and closed the door. I thought, she was always this person. The whole time, she was always exactly this person. The shape of things now. My mother is 68 now. She lives alone in the house on the quiet street, the house that has been paid off for nearly 20 years and that she has maintained with the same methodical attention she has applied to everything in her life. The gutters were cleaned last fall. The furnace has been inspected. She has a financial advisor she meets with quarterly, and she keeps a folder, her own folder, in her kitchen drawer alongside the one she always had, with current statements for every account she holds. She has not seen Warren since the morning at the door. I have thought about that morning many times, about the explanations he offered and the way she listened to them and the specific sentence she chose when she was done listening. She did not match his volume. She did not produce a speech. She said one sentence and closed the door. That is, I think, the most precise expression of who my mother actually is. My relationship with her is different now than it was before all of this. Not damaged, not strained, but different in the way that relationships are different when something has been seen clearly that was previously blurred. We talk more directly. She asks me questions she would have smoothed over before. I ask questions I would have let go before. There is less managed surface between us and more actual ground. Cora and I have breakfast when I'm in Caulfield now. That started after everything happened, and it has continued. She is 71 and drives a small white car and orders the same thing every time, black coffee and wheat toast, and says things that are compressed and accurate and leave you with something to think about afterward. She noticed before I did. I have told her that directly and she waved it off the way she waves things off, but I think she appreciated it. The thing I carry out of it. I underwrite risk for a living. I assess exposure. I read the fine print of situations, and I ask what could go wrong, and I decide whether the numbers are sound before I agree to stand behind something. I do this with rigor and professional discipline for every policy that crosses my desk. And for 4 years I sent $3,600, $3,000, a month into an account I had never seen a statement for, because the person I trusted most in my life had told me it was for her household, and I believed her, and because somewhere along the way I had accepted without examining it the idea that asking for documentation from someone you love is a form of doubt. It is not doubt. It is care. The two are not the same thing, and the difference between them matters enormously once you can see it clearly. What I know now is that the people who benefit from your deference will sometimes describe your deference as love and your scrutiny as control. Those are definitions designed to serve the definer. You are allowed to write your own. My mother balanced a checkbook by hand for decades.
She knew what a bank statement was.
She needed, not a rescue, but a room where the truth could be laid on the table in front of her without anyone telling her she was too fragile or too far gone to look at it. That is what I tried to give her. That is what Cora helped me give her. That is what the 61 pages of account history, printed without drama across a desk on a quiet Saturday afternoon, actually were. Not a weapon. A document. Documents, when they are accurate and complete, have a way of being enough. That's my story. A printed account history, a kitchen table, and a sentence about a bank statement. Here's what I want to ask you. If you had discovered that someone close to your family had been redirecting money you sent in good faith for years, and your first conversation had to happen with your mother present, not privately, how would you have handled that room? Would you have led with the document or with a conversation? Drop your answer in the comments. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.